Well, good evening again. Here we are back one more time, looking back into the book of Judges. Hope you've had a wonderful week. I've had a great time, a good week. Good to see a lot of you in church Sunday, and that was an enjoyable time. It's really nice to be able to go back and worship like we're doing and enjoy each other's company as well as feeding on the Word and getting the good Word. It's been nice. Last week, I thought I was going to be able to get all the way through chapter 9 on Judges, but as far as I got was chapter 6 when we were ready to start on chapter 7. If you remember, just to recap a little bit, Gideon, it's a story of Gideon. Now, Gideon was kind of at his lowest point where he was winnowing wheat down in the bottom of the hill in the wine press instead of up on the hill at the threshing floor where he should have been, because he's afraid of the Mennonites who would come through and take the crop away from him. And he was just trying to scrape together a little bit for his family and keep it going, not feeling very heroic. And then all of a sudden an angel of the Lord appeared to him and told him he was a mighty warrior and that he was going to be used to free Israel from the domination of the Midianites. And well, that he didn't understand it, as you and I probably wouldn't if we were in that situation. However, God decided to show him some signs, and that this was what he was supposed to be doing. And so remember, he went and made a offering, or made a meal to the angels, and placed it, brought it out to him, and the angel said, "Put it on the stone in front of your house, your tent." He put it on the stone, and the angel put the tip of his staff on the offering, and flames from heaven came down and consumed it. Well, Gideon is pretty well sold, but he wanted another sign. He didn't really have the courage or the confidence that he wanted, that he needed to do this task that God has put before him. So he says, "Look, let me ask you to do one thing for me, Lord." He says, "I'm going to put a fleece out at night, and when I get up in the morning, if the dew is on the fleece and not on the ground, then I'll believe it, and I'll be ready to go." So he got up the next morning, and sure enough, the fleece had so much dew on it that you could wring it out in a whole bowl full of water. So that was a pretty good sign. Well, he said, "One more sign, God, just one more sign. How about let's do this the other way?" Now, it's easy for dew to fall on the fleece, and we know how that would. But let's put the fleece out, and then when I get up in the morning, if the fleece is dry and there's dew on the ground all around, then I'll know. So we got up the next morning. Sure enough, the fleece was dry, and the ground was all wet all around it. So that's kind of where we left him. He was at that time he was pulling his men together to get an army to go out and fight with the Mennonites. It had to be God's army, because he didn't have enough to do it. Remember, his army didn't even have weapons. They weren't allowed to have weapons. So they could get men, and they might have pruning, or might have a pruning fork or a hatchet or something like that, but no real weapons. So then we get to verse 7, and verse 7. Verse 7, or chapter 7, excuse me. Chapter 7, verse 1. When Zerubbabel, remember that was the name that Gideon was given, that is Gideon, and all the people who were with him rose early and encamped beside the well of Harod, so that the camp of the Midianites was on the north side of them, and the hill of Moreh was on the valley. It's just on the if you're looking at a map, and you can see the Sea of Galilee just east or just west of the Sea of Galilee. You'll see a group of mountains and a valley that runs with a river running through it. It runs right down into the Jordan River, and that's where they were camped. Okay. Verse 2. And the Lord said to Gideon, the people who are with you are too many. Too many for me to give the Midianites unto your hands, lest Israel claim glory for itself against me, saying, my own hand has saved me. Now, he had 32,000 men, okay? And that was up against 144,000 Midianites. But Gideon, in his mind, that wasn't enough men. Now, that's not enough men to even to stand before all this huge Midianite army. So, and I think Gideon was just ready to blow the trumpet again and say, hey, send me some more men. But God said to Gideon, you have too many men. I cannot give you the victory with 32,000 men, because you would boast and say that you did it on your own strength and power and might, and so I wouldn't be the one who got the credit for it. Okay, so there was too many men for God to get the credit, so he decided he was going to get rid of them. So now verse 3, now therefore proclaim in the hearing of all the people, saying, whoever is fearful and afraid, let him turn and depart at once from Mount Gilead. And 22,000 of the people returned, and 10,000 remained. Now, he got his army out there, and he said, okay, any people that are afraid, you're too scared to go into battle with me, you're free to go. So what happens? 22,000 of them took off. And that left him with only 10,000 troops. Now, a while ago, he thought that all these people that he had, he thought that big group that he had wasn't enough. He really thought that the 32,000 men that he had was not enough, and now God says they're too many. We got to get rid of part of them. So he told all those that were afraid to go home. So they went home, left them there, and left only 10,000 men to fight the battle. So there he's standing with 10,000 men. And God pulled a plug on him again, scared him, or let him know again that wasn't right, and he had to still have too many men. And he thought only 10,000 men wasn't enough to make anyone afraid. Gideon was only 10,000 men. That would cause anybody to say, hey, God, I can't do that. And so Gideon wasn't any different. But God said, really? You still have too many men. That 10,000 is too many to go up against 144,000 Midianites. So it gets better. Verse 5. So he brought all the people down to the water, and the Lord said to Gideon, anyone or everyone who laps from the water with his tongue as a dog laps, you shall set apart by himself likewise anyone who gets down on his knees to drink. And the number of those who lapped, verse 6, the number of those who lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, was 300 men. But all the rest of the people got down on their knees to drink the water. Now, the original distinction here between those that knelt and those that drink with their hands, and those 300 who put their faces down to the water and lapped like a dog. There's a lot of different ideas of why that was, or how they were selected that way. They said if they get down on their knees and stick their face into the water, That's one thing. The ones who pick up the water and lap it with their tongues from their hands, that's the ones I want you to keep. Well, some say the reason for that is because those who are lapping out of their hand are able to keep watch and be vigilant and be the best. But I don't think that makes much difference when you only got 300 men anyway. You know, so it was probably the most unlikely. It was probably that those who did that were the ones that you wouldn't want to pick if you were picking. You wouldn't want to pick them because that would make it more. If the more unlikely ones were chosen, it'd make it even clearer that the victory was not a human achievement, that God did it. Okay. All right, verse 14 or verse 10 or 8. So the people took provisions and their trumpets in their hands, and he sent away the rest of Israel. So they took all the provisions that these that were leaving had, so that they would have more for themselves, their own sea rations or MREs or whatever they used in those days, and they also took their trumpet, so that each one would have a trumpet. And he sent away the rest of Israel, and every man to his tent, and he retained 300 men. Now the camp of Midian was below him in the valley. So this is another. He's probably feeling pretty queasy right about now with only 300 men, but God is going to give him the confidence he needs. So the enemy was camped down below them. They were up on the mountain, and the enemy was camped down in the valley. So verse 9 says, "It happened on the same night that the Lord said to him, Arise and go down against the camp, for I have delivered it unto your hand. Verse 10, "But if you are afraid to go, if you're afraid to go down to the camp with Purah, your servant." So you don't have to go by yourself if you're afraid. Verse 11, "And you shall hear what they say." So you can get down and eavesdrop on and see what's going on with the enemy. "And afterward your hand shall be strengthened to go down against the camp." So if you go down there and listen to what they got to say, and I'll guarantee you're going to be stronger and have more confidence. So then he went down with Purah, his servant, to the outpost of the armed men who were in the camp. Verse 12, "Now the Midianites and Amalekites, all the people of the east, were lying in the valley." So, boy, there's a lot of people. "As numerous as the locusts. And their camels were without number." They had more camels, and then everybody didn't have a camel. So there was a lot more men than there were camels. But their camels you couldn't number them. There were so many of them. "And as the sands of the seashore in multitude." And when Gideon had come, there was a man telling a dream. So he was sitting there. He went down to eavesdrop, and he overheard these soldiers, or these enemy soldiers, talking. And then one was telling about a dream that he had. He said, "When Gideon had come, there was a man telling a dream to his companion. He said, I have had a dream. To my surprise, a loaf of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian, and it came to a tent and struck it so that it fell and overturned, and the tent collapsed." Verse 14, "Then his companion answered and said, This is nothing else but the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. Into his hands God has delivered Midian and the whole camp." So this dream of yours is talking about how Gideon, the son of Joash, or Gideon, the sword of Gideon, is going to strike us and take over our whole camp, all of us. Okay. Now, this is Gideon's final lesson that they're teaching, that God's teaching him before he goes into battle. He goes down to the edge of the camp and he eavesdropped, and while these two soldiers are talking. Now, something else that's important here is that they said the dream was that a loaf of barley bread came rolling into camp. They made their bread in like big loaves of wheels. Barley was something that even that was used to make bread for only the poorest of people. The average person there would not even think about eating a barley loaf. They ate wheat. So this was something else. In other words, they were talking about the least of the grain, or Gideon being the least of his tribe was going to come down and take over. So God's lesson is there in all of that. Verse 16, chapter 7. Then he divided the 300 men into three companies and put a trumpet into each man's hands, with empty pitchers and the torches inside the pitchers. So he lit the torches, put these clay pots or pitchers over the top of it so that he wouldn't be able to see the torch while it was night. And they were going to move at night also. That was another important thing here. Now, there's divine sovereignty and human responsibility go hand in hand here, because this is not just, God planned this out, but also Gideon is using his mind and his head and his knowledge to make this go about. When he divides these guys into the three companies and gives them the pitcher and the torch and instructions with it. Verse 17, and he said to them, look at me, and do likewise. Watch, and when I come to the edge of the camp, you shall do it as I do. When I blow the trumpet, and all those with me, then you also blow the trumpet on every side of the whole camp, and say, the sword of the Lord and Gideon. Now, where did he get that? He got that from the enemy, didn't he? The sword of the Lord and Gideon. And when I blow verse 19, so Gideon and the 100 men who were with him came to the outpost of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, just as they had posted the watch, and they blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers and that were in their hands. Now, so here they are, all these only 300 men, but they've split into three companies, and they kind of got this whole camp surrounded, and they got these torches under the pitchers, which can't be seen. They're sneaking around, they're getting up there, and when the signal is given, they break the pitchers, and there's torchlight everywhere. And they blow in the trumpets, and usually there's only one trumpet per company of men, or per group of, hundreds of men. So when the trumpets blow, they see all these lights. The half awake or half sleeping Midianites and Amorites and all the people that are camped down there, they come up out of there and they're startled. They have no idea. And look, to them, they're surrounded. They don't know who's who, so they start fighting each other. Verse 21, and every man stood on his place all around the camp, and the whole army ran and cried out and fled. They all ran, cried out, and fled, and were fighting each other. And when the 300 blew the trumpets, the Lord set every man's sword against his companion throughout the whole camp. See? And they were fighting each other. And the army fled to Beth Acacia toward Zereth, and as far as the borders of Abel, Menorah, and Tabbath. They were clear out of the territory, all the way out. But, verse 23, and the men of Israel gathered together from Naphtali, Asher, and Manasseh, and pursued the Midianites. So these tribes that Gideon had contacted or sent messages to, they cut them off at the pass, so to speak. Verse 24, then Gideon sent messengers throughout all the mountains of Ephraim, saying, come down against the Midianites and seize them. This is where the message come in. And seize from them the water, and seize from them the watering places as far as Beth-bara and the Jordan. So take over the places that are where there's water. Then all the men of Ephraim gathered together and seized the watering places as far as Beth-bara and the Jordan. and they captured two princes of the Midianites, Oreb and Zeb. And they killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb, and Zeb they killed at the winepress of Zeb. They pursued Midian and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon on the other side of the Jordan. Now, all of the victory was God's given. The shrewd tactics, like I say, that played a part in this was very important too. Now, Gideon showed a great skill in deploying his small little band in such a way as to create the impression that there's a huge force surrounding the camp. And then when they cried out a sword for the Lord and Gideon, they played on the fears that were already there, and they overtook them. And then the rest of as they ran away, they were taken by the rest of the tribe. Good tactics, but also a wonderful God who played the role in this and got it all set up. Okay, chapter 8. This is just a continuance of the record of Gideon as the judge. And here we're going to find events that came to pass after this remarkable deliverance that God gave Gideon over the Midianites. Now the children of Israel are free again, and as a result, they're free again. Remember what happens every time they get to be free? They're prosperous for a while, and they're blessed for the first time in a long time, and they're grateful to Gideon for all that he's done. How long will that last, though? They're grateful to him, and we see in verse 8 or chapter 8, verse 1. Now the men of Ephraim, they weren't too happy with him to start with. The men of Ephraim said to him, "Why have you done this to us by not calling us when we went to fight the Midianites?" And they reprimanded him sharply. So he said, "Why didn't you call us out when you set up the original battle scheme?" And so, verse 2. So he said to them, "What have I done now in comparison with you? Compared to what you did, you overtook them and you finished them off. And so compared to that, what have I done?" It says, "Is not gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the vintage of Abiezer?" Verse 3, "God has delivered into your hands the princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb. And what was I able to do in comparison to you?" Then their anger toward him subsided, and they said that when he said that. So Ephraim and Manasseh were the two leading tribes in the central sector of Israel. Now it's probably for this reason that the Ephraimites felt slighted by the fact that Gideon, who was a member of the tribe of Manasseh, when he didn't include them in his initial call-up. But Gideon hadn't yet completed the war with the Midianites, at least in to his own satisfaction. He couldn't afford an all-out rift in his own ranks of this crucial stage. So the Ephraimites had in fact done a very good job had every right to be proud of what they had done. But when Gideon pointed this out to them, their anger subsided, and no longer were they upset with him over it. Okay. Verse 4. When Gideon came to the Jordan, he and his 300 men who were with him crossed over, exhausted, but still in pursuit. They were still chasing down these kings. They were chasing down Zebah and Zeranumah, the kings of Midian. They were chasing him down, and they weren't going to give up on it. Verse 5. Then he said to the men of Succoth, he crossed over and he's in the town of Succoth now, or the area of Succoth, and so he's talking to the elders there, and he says, "Please give loaves of bread to the people who follow me. I need some loaves of bread. I need food for my soldiers, for my men here. And would you please give us some? And for they're exalted, and I'm pursuing Zebah and Zeranumah, kings of Midian." Verse 6. And the leaders of Succoth said, Are the hands of Zebah and Zerahumah now in your hand, that we should give bread to your army? Have you already captured them, and you want us to pay you good for doing that? Verse 7. So Gideon said, For this cause, when the Lord has delivered Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, then I will tear your flesh with the thorns of the wilderness and with the briars. He says, now, God's going to deliver these guys to me, and when he does, I'm going to come back here, and you're going to pay the price for not helping us out and not feeding my troops. Then he went up from there to Peniel, and spoke to them in the same way. And the men of Peniel answered him as the men of Succoth had answered. So he went to Peniel and asked them to feed him, and they told him the same thing. Verse 9, so he also spoke to the men of Peniel, saying, When I come back in peace, I will tear down this tower. They had a huge tower there, and a lot of people lived in it, and it was part of it. And he was going to tear it down because they didn't treat his troops right. So Gideon's pursuit of the captors of Zebah and Zalmunna in this second phase of the war took place east of the Jordan. So he's crossed over the Jordan now. He's over on the Transjordan side. He passed towards this goal, pressed on towards the goal of capturing these guys. He was determined that he needed to capture them to finish this off. But he also needed to feed his men. Their men were hungry and they were weary. And the refusal of these leaders of Succoth and Peniel to give him support didn't set well with him. So that's why he told them what he did. Okay, verse 10. Now Zebah and Zalmunna, Zebah and Zalmunna. Oh, that's Zalmunna. Now I got it. Zebah and Zalmunna were at Karkor, and their armies with them, about 15,000, all who were left of all the army of the people of the east. For 120,000 men who drew the sword had fallen. So they'd already lost all those men, 120,000 men. Verse 11. Then Gideon went up by the road of those who dwell in tents on the east of Nobiah. In other words, he took the pathway or the traveled the way that the nomads did. At Noah and Zogbanea, and he attacked the army while the camp felt secure. They thought they were secure, but here he come. And when Zebah and Zalmunna fled, he pursued them, and he took the two kings of Midian, Zebah and Zalmunna, and routed the whole army. He took the kings and he wiped out the whole army. In verse 13, then Gideon, the son of Joash, returned from battle from Ascent at Hares. And he caught a young man of the men of Succoth and interrogated him, and he wrote down for him the leaders of Succoth and its elders, 77 men. So see, he wanted to know who those guys were that was to blame for not feeding his troops. Then he came to the men of Succoth and said, Here are Zebah and Zalmunna, about whom you ridicule me, saying, Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna now in your hand, that we should give bread to your weary men? And he took the elders of the city and thorns of the wilderness and briars, with them he taught the men of Succoth. So he taught them a lesson. He wrapped them up in briars and thorns. Verse 17. Then he tore down the tower of Peniel. So he promised them he was going to do that, and he did it. And he killed the men of the city. It's because they refused to feed his troops. Verse 18, and he said to Zebah and Zalmunna, what kind of men were they whom you killed at Tabor? So they answered, as you are, so were they. Each one resembled the son of a king. So it doesn't really say specifically what they're talking about here, but it sounds like that he's saying that it was some of Gideon's relatives that they killed at Tabor. And because of that, verse 19, then he said, they were my brothers and sons of my mother. So this is another reason why it's thought that it is his relatives. And as the Lord lives, if you had let them live, I would not kill you. Verse 20, and he said to Jether, his firstborn, so he's got his son there with him, his firstborn son. He says, rise and kill them. He asked his firstborn son, giving him the opportunity to kill these kings. But the youth would not draw his sword, for he was afraid, because he was still a youth. So Zebah and Zalmunna said, rise yourself and kill us, for as a man is, so is his strength. In other words, I'm glad that your son didn't want to do it. You do it yourself, because the more important a man is that kills me, the more important that makes me. So Gideon rose and killed Zebah and Zalmunna, and took the crescent ornaments that were on their camels' necks. Then the men of Israel said to Gideon, rule over us. See, now they see what Gideon did, so they didn't have a king. So now they're wanting a king. So they're asking Gideon to rule over them, to be their king. But rule over us, both you and your son, and your grandson also, for you have delivered us from the hand of Midian. So, but Gideon said to them, I will not rule over you, nor shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you. So Gideon realized who was in charge here, didn't he? Then Gideon said to them, I would like to make a request of you, that each of you would give me the earrings from his plunder, for they had golden earrings because they were Ishmaelites. So they answered, we gladly give them. And they spread out the garment, and each man threw into the earrings from his plunder. Now the weight of the gold earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold, besides the crescent ornaments, pennants, and purple robes, which were on the kings of Midian, and besides the chains that were around the camels' necks. Now the Israelites proposed that Gideon should be their king. They wanted him to be more than just a judge. They wanted him to be their king and their ruler. And they wanted his sons to succeed him. But Gideon had actually been behaving more like a king since he'd crossed the Jordan. And he seemed it seemed like the only right thing for his followers that they should now become one. But the danger all along had been that the people would fall and would fail to give the Lord the credit for their deliverance. See, they're giving Gideon all the credit and not the Lord, because this is what they did. If the Lord was to rule, he must be the one that's inquired of. And it was apparently with the intention of making such an inquiry possible through Gideon, and that Gideon had had made this possible. Verse 27, and Gideon made it. Okay, he took the earrings and the chains and all the gold, and then Gideon made it into an ephod and set it up in his city. Now, an ephod, remember the ephod that the priest had in the old days, in the days of the tabernacle. It was like a cloth vest that came down, and then it had all the stones of the various tribes in it, precious stones representing each one of the tribes, the 12 stones. Well, Gideon made one of these. Now, I don't know, it doesn't say whether it was a cloth one that he embedded the gold in, or if he made the whole thing by gold. It seems to be that he made it made an ephod, but he made it like a statue. It was all solid gold as a statue, and they set it up. He made it an ephod, and he set it up in his city. So he didn't wear it; he set it up in his city, probably with the idea that people will see that and worship God through it. But he set it up in Ophrah, and the Israel and reading on verse 27, and all Israel played the harlot. See, again, this is what God warned them against. They played the harlot with it there, because it became a snare to Gideon and his house. They started worshiping it instead of God. It became an idol. It was the act of piety went wrong. Gideon wanted them to worship God, and they put the ephod up, and instead it became what they were worshiping. And Gideon and his family also became involved in this false worship. So it was the downfall of Gideon as much as it was the people. Verse 28: Thus Midian was subdued before the children of Israel, so that they lifted their heads no more, and the country was quiet for 40 years in the days of Gideon. So during the time of Gideon, it was 40 years that it was quiet. There was no wars. Everything was fine. In verse 29, then Zerubbabel, the son of Joash, went and dwelt in his own house. So he had set up his own place to live, and Gideon was living more, even though he didn't want to be king, he was living like a king. He had his own house. It was like more of a palace that he lived in. And Gideon had 7, because he was he had what he wanted and did what he wanted, even though it was he was now really turned against the worshiping in God, because he ends up with, it says here, Gideon had 70 sons. 70 sons. And they were his own offsprings, for he had many wives, it says. Verse 31, and his concubine, who was in Shechem, so he had a concubine that still lived with her parents down in Shechem, also bore him a son, whose name was called Abimelech. And this is going to be a thorn in the flesh of the Israelites. It's Abimelech. We'll see it as we go along. Verse 32, now Gideon, the son of Joash, died at a good old age, and was buried in the tomb of Joash his father in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. Verse 33, so it was as soon as Gideon was dead, see, here we go again, as soon as he was dead, the children of Israel again played the harlot with the Baals, and made Baal-berith their god. Baal-berith is the word, worshiping the god of Baal. Thus the children, verse 34, thus the children of Israel did not remember the Lord their God. They'd forgotten all about God, who had delivered them from the hands of all the enemies on every side. Verse 35, nor did they know kindness to the house of Jerubbabel. See, they turned against Gideon now, in the accordance with the good that he had done for Israel. So they had forgotten all about what Gideon had done for them. Now after his death, this idolatry that was associated with the ephod, which he had set up, quickly developed to a full-scale Baal worship. And now his son Abimelech, which is coming out of that concubine, showed that he had one of his father's. Didn't have any of the scruples that his father had about acquiring power, And we'll see later on just where that goes. But that's enough for today. I hope you can see how the story of Gideon applies to us as well. How we have such a tendency, and God will bless us and take care of us and get us out of things. And as soon as we're out, we'll relax and we're happy and just kind of turn our backs on God, put him back in that basement and close the door. So keep that in mind. I have enjoyed this, and I hope you have too. And I'm so glad you joined me tonight for this lesson. Next week we will start up again and keep on going until we finish it. I wish you the very, very best. May God's grace be upon you. May his face shine on you. May his hands be upon you, granting you everything that you need in your life, keeping you happy, healthy, and prosperous. God bless you. I love you.